Hello everyone, welcome to the fourth week's content. In this week we're going to discuss the monitor model by Stefan Krashen. In the video first we'll talk about the five hypotheses and explain them, and in the second part we will discuss the criticism of this model in detail. Krashen's monitor model enjoyed considerable prominence in SLA research. This is probably the most comprehensive of existing theories in SLA, although criticized for serious flaws in a number of respects, especially for its treatment of language learner variability. The model consists of five central hypotheses. This model is significant as it influences the formation and development of second language acquisition as a discipline or study area. For comprehensive account of this model, you can see Krashen 1981A, 1982, and Krashen and Terrell 1983. Krashen's monitor model includes five hypotheses. First, the acquisition learning hypothesis, then the natural order hypothesis, next the monitor hypothesis, and after that we'll discuss the input hypothesis, and finally we will explain the affective filter hypothesis. The acquisition learning hypothesis lies at the heart of Krashen's theory. It is applicable to the process of internalizing new second language knowledge, to storing this knowledge, and to using it in actual performance. Acquisition occurs subconsciously as a result of participating in natural communication when the focus is on meaning. Learning occurs as a result of conscious study of the formal properties of the language. In storage, the acquired knowledge is located in the left hemisphere of the brain in the language areas. It is available for automatic processing. Learned knowledge is metalinguistic in nature. It is also stored in the left hemisphere of the brain, but not necessarily in the language areas. It is available for controlled processing. Thus, acquired and learned knowledge are stored separately. In performance, acquired knowledge serves as the major source of initiating both comprehension and production of utterances. Learned knowledge is available for use only by the monitor. According to the natural order hypothesis of Krashen, the learners may follow a more or less invariant order in the acquisition of formal grammatical features. The grammatical structures are acquired in a predictable order. When the learners are engaged in natural communication tasks, they will manifest the standard order. But when they are engaged in tasks that require or permit the use of metalinguistic knowledge, a different order will emerge. The monitor hypothesis is the third hypothesis in this model. The monitor is the device that learners use to edit their language performance. It utilizes learned knowledge by acting upon and modifying utterances generated from acquired knowledge. Krashen argues that monitoring has an extremely limited function in language performance, even where adults are concerned. Krashen offers three conditions for its use. Number one, there must be sufficient time. Number two, the focus must be on form, not meaning. And number three, the user must know the rules. He recognizes that the editing can also be done using acquired competence. He termed it as editing by feel. The idea of editing by feel is neither developed nor is explained how it takes place. The input hypothesis is the fourth hypothesis in this model. According to this hypothesis, acquisition takes place as a result of the learner having understood input that is a little beyond the current level of his or her competence. Input that is incomprehensible to the learner will automatically be at the right level. Next, we are going to talk about the affective filter hypothesis. This deals with low affective factors related to SLA, and it covers the ground of the acculturation model. Krashen incorporates the notion of the affective filter as proposed by Dule and Barth. The filter controls how much input the learner comes into contact with and how much input is converted into intake. It is affective because the factors which determine its strength have to do with the learner's motivation, self-confidence, or anxiety state. Learners with high motivation and self-confidence and with low anxiety have low filters and so obtain and let in plenty of input. In contrast, learners with low motivation, little self-confidence and high anxiety have high filters and so receive little input and allow even less in. The affective filter influences the rate of development, but it does not affect the route. Now we are going to discuss some causative variables taken into account in the monitoring model. The first causative variable that is being taken into account in the monitoring model is aptitude. Krashen argues that aptitude only relates to learning. The aptitude of a learner helps predict how well he or she will perform on grammar type tests that provide the right condition for the operation of the monitor. Next, we're going to talk about the role of the first language. Krashen rejects the view that first language interferes with second language acquisition. He rather sees the use of the first language as a performance strategy. The learner falls back on his first language when he lacks a rule in the second language. He initiates an utterance using his first language and then substitutes the second language lexical items, also making small repairs to the resulting string by means of the monitor. Next, we're going to talk about the routines and patterns. Krashen rejects the view that formulaic speech contributes to acquisition. In his opinion, formulas play a performance role only by helping the learner to outperform his competence. They are not broken down and their separate parts are not, therefore, incorporated into the learner's creative rule system. Rather, acquisition catches up with the routines and patterns, that is, the structural knowledge contained in the formulas is developed separately. Next, we are going to discuss the individual differences. Krashen claims that acquisition follows a natural route. Thus, there is no individual variation in the acquisition process itself. However, there is variation in the rate and the extent of acquisition as a result of the amount of comprehensible input received and the strength of the affective filter. There is also variation in performance brought about by the extent of the learner's reliance on learned language. Krashen indicates three types of monitor users. First, he mentions about overusers. Next, he mentions about underusers, and there is a third type called optimal users. Age is one of the important causative variables in SLA. Age influences SLA in a number of ways. It affects the amount of comprehensible input that is obtained. Younger learners may get more than older learners. Age also affects learning. Older learners are better suited to study a language form and also to use learned knowledge in monitoring. Finally, age influences the affective state of the learner. After puberty, the affective filter is likely to increase in strength. Perhaps as a result of its prominence in SLA research, the monitor model has also received a lot of criticism. Here we'll discuss three central issues for detailed consideration. These are the acquisition learning distinction, the monitor, and Krashen's treatment of variability. So first we're going to present the acquisition learning distinction. The acquisition learning distinction has been called theological in that it has been formulated in order to confirm a specific goal, namely the successful SLA, is the result of acquisition. McLaughlin argues that monitor model is unreliable because the acquisition learning distinction is defined in terms of subconscious and conscious processes which are not open to inspection. The first criticism then is a methodological one. The acquisition learning hypothesis is not acceptable because it cannot be tested empirically. A further objection concerns Krashen's claim that acquisition and learning are entirely separate and that the acquired knowledge cannot turn into learned knowledge. Krashen refers to this as the non-interface position. McLaughlin, Rivers, Stevick, Sherwood Smith, and Gregg have all challenged this position on the basis that when learned knowledge is automatized through practice, it becomes acquired, that is available for use in spontaneous conversation. Whether the acquisition learning distinction is valid or not, it can also be criticized on the grounds that Krashen does not really explain the cognitive processes that are responsible either for acquisition or learning. Larsen Freeman observes Krashen does not explain what the learner does with input. If acquisition learning distinction is to have any power, it is surely necessary to specify in what way the processes responsible for each knowledge type are different from each other. This Krashen does not do. Thus, despite its comprehensiveness, the monitor model is still a black box theory. The next point of criticism in this model is monitoring. There are several difficulties with Krashen's account of monitoring. One of these is again methodological. The only evidence for monitoring lies in the language user's own account of trying to apply explicit rules. But both McLaughlin and Rivers point out to the difficulty of distinguishing introspectively rule application and feel. Editing by feel includes monitoring. Both can be seen as aspects of what Morrison and Lowe refers to as the critical faculty. This enables us to become critically aware of what we have created and hence allow us to control it. We are able to attend to the form of our utterances without using conscious rules and without being able to make explicit how modifications in the initial output have been effected. This happens all the time in writing when we seek to conform to the conventions of the written medium, and it also happens in speech. Morrison and Lowe offer a number of other criticisms of monitoring. They point out that monitoring does not account for the reception of utterances. They also note that monitoring is limited to syntax, but in fact learners and users have the ability to edit their pronunciation, lexis, and perhaps most important of all, their discourse. Krashen does not give any consideration to monitoring as a collaborative activity involving both the learner and his interlocutor. To this list, Ellis also draws attention to the fact that Krashen tends to combine monitoring and learning, although the former refers to performance and the latter to rule internalization. As commented on the above, there is no detailed discussion of how learning takes place. Finally, we are going to discuss the point of variability. The monitor model is a dual competence theory of SLA. That is, it proposes that learners' knowledge of the L2, which is reflected in variable performance, is best characterized in terms of two separate competences, which Krashen labels as acquisition and learning. The alternative position is to build a variable competence model in which learners' variable performance is seen as a reflection of a stylistic continuum. Which model, the monitor model or a variable competence model, best fits the known facts about SLA? The available evidence indicate that learners produce utterances which are formally different even when it is evident that they are focused on meaning. Data in SLA literature demonstrate that even what Krashen calls accurate knowledge is not homogeneous, but once claims about the homogeneity of accurate knowledge are seem to be unreliable, it makes little sense to maintain a dual competence explanation. The kinds of performance that result from focusing on meaning and on forms are best treated as aspects of single but variable competence, which contains alternative rules for realizing the same meanings in much the same way as does the native speaker's competence. To sum up, despite the comprehensiveness of the monitoring model, it possesses serious theoretical problems regarding the variability, regarding the validity of the acquisition learning distinction, the operation of monitoring, and the explanation of variability in learner language. Also, the input hypothesis does not account for the fact that acquisition can take place without two-way negotiation of meaning, nor does it recognize that output also plays an important role. Thanks for watching the video. If you have any question, we will discuss in the consultation sessions.